Previously on the 8 Question Show.
It's funny that we're sitting in Scranton right now because Joe Biden has never been a fan of cannabis.
Really?
Yeah, he's a big drug warrior, if you will. And even you've seen recently maybe that like White House staff and people who work in the government were, he was like fired a bunch of people who are using cannabis. And, so he's not so 420 friendly.
Can't afford, that's why I'm front line, hand the sword. I do this all for myself, not the cash or no damn award. I need intelligence to craft my bars. I need the medicine that grows effervescent from the hands of God. I need inheritance to slash the odds, create a pipeline to the well while you grasp for straws. 8 questions, 8 questions, 8 questions, 8 questions, 8 questions, 8 questions, 8 questions.
Welcome back to the 8 Question Show. We have our friend Mike Z here. Listen, my brother Brian is really excited about this question. I'm actually interested in it too. I have 2 smart gentlemen here. So Mike, question 6. Can marijuana help you spiritually?
Absolutely, 100%. I think that this is, if you go back to the tradition, this was a sacred plant. This was a plant that was in some cultures worshipped, as a god, as divine, because it was so powerful. And, it's even been argued by legitimate scholars that the holy anointing oil in the Bible is cannabis extract.
Really?
Yeah.
I read that.
Yeah.
What?
I read that.
And, this is an interesting question. And, I'm going to throw psychedelics into the mix, if you don't mind a little bit, because...
Please, I have a point about that.
Yeah, because I think, there's a long history of people using these mind-altering plants specifically because they are mind-altering or consciousness-altering. And whether they're doing it for, some kind of questing or journey or some kind of spiritual purpose or healing purpose, in my opinion, my belief, they're seeking connection to something greater. And, I don't know how you define spirituality or what that means to you, but I certainly think, look, I'm not going to say every person using cannabis is using it for spiritual use or for like enlightenment or whatever. But I certainly think, I can tell you my personal experience. I'm a meditator. I've gone to the, 10-day silent retreats. I've done a little bit of that stuff. I've also, I guess you could consider me a psychonaut. I've dabbled in psychedelics, and I can tell you that those things, pair really well. And I believe used intentionally, a little bit of cannabis, even a microdose, or a little bit of mushrooms, even a microdose, can supercharge your meditation practice or spiritual practice. And even there have been studies where they took religious leaders of different creeds and gave them psychedelics.
Whoa.
And asked them, and some of them, I don't remember exactly the study, but there was a group that had tried them before and a group that had never tried them. Different religions, they had Muslim, Jewish, Christian faith leaders, and pretty much, I don't want to say all of them, but an overwhelming majority of them agreed that there was, they had a religious experience, whatever that may be. And so I have no doubt in my mind that these plants, when used with intention,
I had to look up something.
will they open up a path to some other consciousness.
So, I mean, there's even some religions, like take Rastafarianism.
Mm-hmm.
The use of cannabis is almost like a sacrament
Mm-hmm.
to them, and it's part of their spiritual practice. I was reading this one book. called The Botany of Desire.
Great book.
Great book.
Love that book. Yeah.
And they're talking about, there was a whole section of it dedicated to cannabis.
Mhm.
And they were talking about how in Western culture, there's like this immediate stigma against the thought of pursuing spiritual enlightenment in plants or nature, for that matter. Because in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, in the book of Genesis, the reason we got kicked out of the Garden of Eden is because Eve, go ahead, I'm quizzing you. Why did we get kicked out?
Because she was a bit the forbidden fruit.
She bit the forbidden fruit. So there's this like, and
I'm on point.
See, he knows. He's going to heaven.
I'm on point.
So it's like, you know, there's certain wisdom in nature that it might be there, but we're afraid of it. We don't like it. We don't think it's appropriate to touch it that way. God got mad at us last time we pursued spiritual wisdom from a plant. So don't do it. Don't do it. But there's other faiths where it's the basis of all of it.
It's funny. It's funny you said it, right? Because you know, any of you here know who Neil Brennan is?
Neil Brennan.
My man.
Yeah.
See,
Sounds familiar.
our production extraordinaire knows who that is. Neil Brennan is Dave Chappelle's right hand guy.
Yep.
Okay.
He was funny because like anytime he goes on interviews, he refers to himself as a white guy in the corner. Like if you ever meet him in person, you're like, who the fuck is this dude? Right? But he's a genius comic. He is hilarious.
Yep.
He didn't believe in God at all. Right? He was on the Breakfast Club.
Mm-hmm.
He did ayahuasca.
Oh.
Right? He said the first time he did it, it was a horrible experience. He was throwing up and shit. And then he says the second time he did it, he was with like a person who knew what the fuck they were doing. So he actually had like the right experience. And he said, dude, it was the most eye-opening and brain-altering thing that he could ever experience in his life. And he said it made me believe in God.
Wow.
That's how it kind of changed him.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to like how and you all can school me on this if I'm out here. I'm always curious to how like it was discovered how you can consume something that's grown and it gives you this. Like for example, who discovered if you grab weed, crush it up, roll it and smoke it out of something, you could feel this with psychedelics or ayahuasca or whatever. Who figure out you take some roots or whatever the case may be, make it into something and drink it or whatever, and it gives you this mind. One, it tells you how powerful the brain is actually when you kind of do these things. But like, who figured it out and figured out like the right dosage?
I heard the theory on weed that like when we were cave people, we probably just burning it in a fire in our cave.
Oh, and then like
you're just breathing it. You're hotboxing inside this cave. And
how would you know? It's like dandelions, and
just
tulips and shit, and it's like, whoa, shit! You think it's dandelions, tulips, and whatever this weed was? You like breathe. How would like this?
I don't know. There's probably like a ton of it growing alongside. They're like, I don't know, just burn this, and then they're like, there's something. I feel different now.
Yeah. So I don't know. But it's kind of funny, like how you said, like how psychedelics and other things kind of help you with your spirituality, because you had this Neil Brennan he was a genius comic who didn't believe any of that stuff, did ayahuasca, and now he's a believer. Like that's powerful to me.
Yeah,
I don't know what he experienced to make him change, but it's crazy.
Well, Mike, we're going to touch on the future of cannabis for one of our last questions. This one, I want to touch on the future of perhaps spirituality as it relates to the increase of use of, plants, cannabis, fungi, so mushrooms, psychedelics, etc. Do you think that this might have some type of impact on spiritual practice going forward? And if so, how so?
Oof. I'm going to put on my hippie hat over
Please
here.
do.
So we're getting stoner philosophical here, which is, I'm a big believer that most people could benefit from consuming a little bit of cannabis or a little bit of mushrooms or psychedelics or whatnot. And of course, with the right context, with the right intention, with the right support, I believe that the world would be such a better place if if some of these, the Vladimir Putins of the world and some of these
Smoke a joint, yeah.
other,
You just go ahead before I do this.
Because I think by and large, what is it that happens to people when they take these drugs, right? The common thing that you hear is ego dissolution or whatever. And then that there's this experience of oneness or connectedness or transcendence or whatever that in and of itself is therapeutic for people because they get some perspective of, whatever's been causing so much suffering, whatever belief in my mind or whatever physical sensation plagues me, for that little window of time, people are able to step outside of that. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And, it's funny, you see there's a great book called, I want to say it's called Stealing Fire by, I want to say Stephen Kotler, the guy, he writes about flow and all this kind of stuff. He's like, why do people do this? Why do we have this human curiosity for mind altering substances and transcendence? And, I think humans are just searching for the truth.
Yeah.
And we want to know, there's this great mystery we're a part of. We all want to know, why am I here? Why is this? And, I feel like cannabis and all these psychedelic plants or whatnot are a pathway for exploring and also for gaining some insight into that. And, I think it's, Terence McKenna who had the stoned ape theory. I don't know if I'm remembering that correctly. But, basically the theory that the reason, we evolved from primates to humans was because we ate psychedelic mushrooms and over time, and well, let's take a step back and go back to the science, right? Because we know now, and, as we're chatted offline a little about the Netflix show, How to Change Your Mind.
Yeah.
That goes into all this. We have good science behind some of this stuff now that when people eat psychedelic mushrooms, for example, what happens in your brain? New pathways are formed. New connections are formed. Neuroplasticity increases. So it's not just just like, oh, I'm going to eat some mushrooms and trip. It's like, no, there's actually something happening in your brain that's creating new connections, restoring parts that were damaged, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's true. And 3, you're having an experience in your brain that you almost otherwise would never have. So, there is something to that of, I don't know, depending on how you define evolution, but if your brain is forming new connections and growing, I feel like that's a pretty good, example of evolution. And, I don't know where that fits into God or spirituality or whatever, but, again, I think no doubt that these plants not only can enhance a spiritual practice, but I think also can enhance a person's appreciation for the natural world, which I believe in and of itself is a form of spirituality.
It's funny you say that in terms of that, like being natural, right? It's funny, like how everything that we're talking about to a degree, and you all, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong. Mushrooms, it's natural.
Yep.
Already, it's here.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like made up in a box somewhere. It's like it's grown. Ayahuasca is like, it isn't like a root or something like that.
Right.
Yep.
It's here already. Right. So it's almost like, as a matter of fact, from just not from like a,
I think I know where you're going with this.
It's like, if you look at, like, for example, in Brazil, there's still like they have tribes who everything that they do comes from earth.
Mm-hmm.
They're in the jungle, and it's mosquitoes, and when you look at them on TV, and they're like the producers and everybody getting bit, and they're just sitting there like, we're fine. Like, put this on and you're fine. But it came from the earth itself, right? So almost in a way, this could be controversial now, but almost in a way, it seems like everything that you already needed to, whether it's to have a deeper connection to spirituality, and this is not a certain religion, it's like spirituality itself. Everything you need is already here. right?
here.
Think about it. Cannabis is what? It's a plant.
Yep.
Or
Here.
weed or whatever.
You can grow
Yep.
it.
You can grow it. You can grow shrooms. You can do ayahuasca is a part of a root of it. So it's like God put it here, or whoever you believe in, put it here already. And it's just for us to discover and figure out.
Mm.
And it could, because if we're getting real, if it wasn't supposed to be here, it wouldn't be out in nature itself.
Absolutely. And I use this exact train of thought for really religious people who are sometimes
Over
afraid
religious.
of cannabis.
Oh yeah.
Mm.
And I
Sorry.
ask them, well,
Sorry, Mom.
who made cannabis? Who made the plants?
Mm.
God. Right? Who made humans? God.
We didn't.
Well, how come we have an endocannabinoid system for these plants? Do you think God made a mistake? You know, so that's the logic I like to ask with those people. But I want to go back to something you said and asked me about earlier, which is like the first people who discovered that you
Yeah.
could, I think that's a fascinating question. I don't know the answer certainly, but one thing I do remember is in India, in their tradition, they would make what's called bhang, or I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, but they would make cannabis tea. And,
Oh, wow.
they would use it for medicine and for ceremony.
Okay.
So, again, probably had some psychedelic effects there. And probably, I don't know very much about their cultural history or anything, but I do know that cannabis was an very important part of it. I think they have a god who's very associated with cannabis, but
It's
again,
funny you said I have a friend who's Native American who said he would give me some history on that in terms of like during the ceremony they would pass around this long. I don't know if he was like just messing with me or not, but he's Native American. Like to this day, they have I forgot what the actual day is called, but they get up in there and they do like this whole thing. And he said, Chris, back in the day, and he said sometimes still now, they have like this very, very, very long pipe that everybody, of course, not the kids, but everybody goes around and puffs. And it is a part of their culture. That's what it is, right? And at first I said, I was like, Jake, are you like messing with me? He said, no, I'm dead serious. As a matter of fact, he actually referred to the movie,
Dances with Wolves.
not that. It was with Owen Wilson and Jackie Chan. I
Shanghai Nights, or
I think so.
Yeah.
It's like Shanghai. So he said, you remember when I think it was Jackie Chan got with Chief's daughter. And before that whole thing, you said how Jackie Chan was just going, everybody was going. He said it's fiction. He said, but that part of it is very, very true.
It actually has an effect.
It actually has an effect on you like that. So he said that has a part of cannabis. Cannabis is in the tube itself. So that's why Jackie Chan was doing what he was doing. But that's part of their culture. It blew me away, to be honest. So I was like, wow. But anyways, Mike, is always a pleasure. I mean, listen. Can marijuana help your spirituality, or help you spiritually? You answered the question when I first asked you. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So everybody has their own experience, of course, so experience it for yourself. But according to the expert here, it does. Tune in next time when we ask Mike, is Big Pharma afraid of marijuana?
Oof.
Check it next time.
Uh-oh.
On the next episode of the 8 Question Show.
I've heard anecdotally that there are certain states where a lot of the farmland is getting bought up by pharma, or tobacco is taking land, and they know, hey, instead of growing tobacco, we're going to be growing cannabis and hemp here, and then exporting it, once interstate commerce is possible when the federal policy changes.